Hey there, Gail. Welcome
Hi,
back.
thank you. Thank you for having me.
Of course, we were just chatting a moment before I hit record, and I was sharing that some of my top ranked podcasts are with the ones with you, our conversations, and you are my kindred spirit, like a mom who is an entrepreneur who gets so many things on such a deep level. And so, yeah, let's talk about something that you and I talk about often. Um, we talk about managing our energy. We talk
Hmm.
about modalities. We talk about streamlining because that's something really
Helps.
vital in
Yeah,
maintaining our sanity.
yeah.
And something that I was just sharing with you is about authenticity, which is becoming a hot topic for me.
Hmm.
So, without further ado, like you were just sharing before we hit record, um, project management tool or something about with AI.
Yeah, I got an email. I use Dropbox to store files, as many people do. And I got an email from them that they have this new calendar tool called Reclaim.ai. And I've been looking at different calendar or task management type of systems that fit what I need it to do, basically. And being someone with ADHD, it's easy or it's easier for me to manage my energy if I can just focus on like one or two things at a time. Oh, I should rephrase that. One thing at a time, one to two things, main things a day. So I actually landed on just using an Excel sheet or a Google sheet. And like, here's my top three things. Here's my morning, afternoon, evening. And here's like the one thing I need to just make sure I get done. And this is especially helpful because my daughter is home all the time now. And I'm basically starting to homeschool her. She's only 5, so there isn't a major urgency in that world, but I don't want her to just be watching screens all day. So I'm managing my own energy, my own time for my business, and then taking care of her and having her do different types of learning activities. So I'm not just depending on screens to keep her occupied. So I've been looking at different kinds of tools. I landed on, I'm just going to use a spreadsheet. I'm going to just use a spreadsheet. I was using Google Tasks to keep track of my tasks and using Google Calendar. And then now I have a new virtual assistant. So we're using ClickUp to manage the tasks that I'm assigning to her. But I'm finding that with both of those tools, if I don't get something done, it turns like red and it's always reminding me like, oh, you're late. And there, in truth, there are some things that have a real due date. Like if I'm doing a marketing campaign for a client, it needs to be done by a certain time. But there are other tasks where, I didn't really need to get that done. That was kind of a nice to have thing, or I could do it tomorrow, not I don't have to do it today. But I get all of these red flags kind of waving in front of me and it feels overwhelming. So I've been looking for something, but honestly, I didn't want to necessarily pay for another tool too. So when Dropbox emailed me and there's like a free trial, I'm like, okay, I'll give this a shot. We already have a Dropbox account. I don't think it's gonna be that much more to add on this thing if it works for me. But I'm really happy with it. I like it because it plugs into my Google Calendar and you can set a task to say if I don't do it, still put it in my calendar somewhere, or it wasn't that important, just delete it. I love that. It's almost like kind of have like a personal assistant. I could just say, no, I didn't really need to do that. Just take it off. Because I'm
And,
also
and that,
someone who thinks I can do everything at once. So I will just like keep adding things to my list when it didn't really need to be there in the first place.
that is so true that like when it comes to AI, even with people's perception of the fear factor, I mean, when we use systems that are probably prior to the true AI integration, um, there's a lack of the human quality, which supposedly we do now get when done well with AI, which is like, okay, do you need a little bit of grace here? Do you need to adjust what the
Right.
expectations are? Because that is
Yeah.
where the human stress comes in. And I'm sure that you have stories as much as I do, like that stress can then feed into your productivity.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've got enough stress in my life with taking care of my daughter, who we did finish the diagnosis process, and she is on the autistic spectrum. And we will be getting more support and therapy, but we're just in the middle of it. And it's been really stressful of taking care of her, making sure I don't lose my cool or do my best to not get upset at her, because it's not her fault that her body and her brain just doesn't work in that way. So it's been stressful.
I realized that also you had mentioned, well, I realized that we all have maybe the spectrum of neurodivergency or ADHD of some form in
Yeah.
us, and perhaps some either genetically or through other skill factors have maybe developed better ability to focus or have attention.
Hmm.
But I know it's very complicated. I keep listening to more and more podcasts and reading about the human mind, the brain. And what I consistently hear is even the experts say that it's still not completely understood how the mind works and then
Yeah.
how other factors play in. But what tools like the one you're describing can do is at least help us cognitively ease in the load.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially if it's our natural tendency to say yes to more things, or to overestimate what we can do, underestimate our time, and put things on. And then if we internalize the feelings we have about it, that maybe the disappointment, or maybe we were told all our lives that we were all these things. It's been proven in studies that people with ADHD are told more negative things about themselves as a child to adulthood. I believe it's 9 times more. So there's a child with ADHD, they're told by maybe their parents, definitely their teachers, are being told these negative things about themselves, and it becomes part of you. You internalize it. And I've learned through learning more about myself that I'm not necessarily leaning on the label or the diagnosis, but just more of validation that this is just how I'm wired. This is just how I was born. And I was kind of curious. I was wondering if this was something that is a recent medical issue, or has it been around in our whole human existence? And Hippocrates actually wrote a little bit about what might have been ADHD. And he thought it was something like uh, someone who has too much fire versus water in their body. So he saw it as like an elemental thing. And he wrote down these symptoms of people who could not, um, who were quick to do something and had trouble focusing. So it may
I
be something that's been around all this time, but because we're many of us are confined to desks and computers and offices, that we may not have an outlet to be able to be our to live our best potential. Um, so I just thought that was kind of interesting.
I find that super interesting because I have had the same internal question in my mind for as long as I've heard about the term ADHD. And seriously, I thought, okay, what if it's been around? And what if, you know, one part of me is wondering, well, because we're in an era and generation, because I heard about it like 30, 40 years ago. What was that name of the drug that starts with an R
Oh,
written?
Ritalin, or there's another Adderall. Is Adderall an ADHD drug?
I don't know.
But I think Ritalin was a popular one. And there's so many more now out there, and then people are also finding more natural ways. Everybody's different. I think people need to find what works best for them.
Yeah, well, I remember when I heard about it, and it was in the context of a family member's young son who was a little more hyper than one would think. But then again, boys can be a little bit rambunctious. But I heard through the grapevines, oh, they put him on this drug. And in my mind, even at as young as I was witnessing this, I thought, but what if we're in the era of pharmaceutical worlds who can be quick to judge and give you medication, and maybe it's got some sort of bandage effect, right? Or placebo effect. But what if it's deeper? What if it's like something that can be understood, is the better word, through
Mm-hmm.
the lens of holistic living? Like
Mm-hmm.
when you said fire versus water, that is very much what the doshas talk about in the Ayurvedic world.
Mm-hmm.
I know I'm considered fire, and it's so true of my personality. And then there's contradictions. Like supposedly, um, I think there's an attention issue at times. But then
Mm-hmm.
again, if you ask me at any one point, my husband can attest to this, he'll walk into a room and he'll be standing right next to me, and I will be so focused that I always scream when he says hello because I'll be startled.
Hyper focus. Yeah.
I get I get like laser focus on whatever
Mm-hmm.
I do. And like literally it's like when I gave that talk about energy awareness, we talk about the floodlight versus the
Mm-hmm.
flashlight.
Mm-hmm.
I'm the flashlight. I don't, and I can maybe become aware consciously there's
Mm-hmm.
something else, someone else, but for the most part, I'm the flashlight. So I think it's a misunderstood whole world, this ADHD. Maybe 20, 30, 40 years from now, they'll be like, we found this one part of the brain that tells us something differently,
Right,
right?
right. Yeah, I think like before technology, if we had a say in our profession, or what we did to contribute to our community, we probably gravitated towards something that we were naturally good at. I know that when I am organizing my house, or I don't do deep cleaning, to be honest. When I'm tidying things up, if I'm washing dishes, it feels good to be using my hands and be doing those things. It does also feel good for me to do planning and to talk things out, which is what I do in my profession. And then there's other things in my business that don't feel good, where they get too detail oriented. I'm on the computer too much, and that doesn't feel great. And I think that's where I think if we're aware of our energy in that way, of how we work and how we operate, hopefully we're in a situation where we have a say to be able to adjust to our strengths in that way. Not everyone has that privilege, but if there is a way that we can, because most of us spend most of our time working, if we can gravitate towards our strengths and in how we operate and how our energy works, I think we would all be happier and maybe even less stressed
And
because of that.
yeah,
Like
and
I think of
contribute.
the kids that were put on medication early on, like 30, 40 years ago. I'm curious to, in today's education system, public education system in the US, for public schools, if they're diagnosed with neurodivergency like autism or ADHD or some other thing, there's a program where they can get accommodations to fit that. Now every school district is different, every teacher is different, every principal is different, but in a great situation they accommodate that child to help them succeed in that learning environment, like giving them time to move around, or having them sit on like a bouncy exercise ball so that can handle the fidgeting, or pairing them up with someone so they get the buddy system or accountability system, which is called body doubling, and that helps someone get things done. So it would be interesting, like if we could go back to that time, if they had accommodations like that, would this child need to be put on medication, on pharmaceutical type medication? So I don't know. And this is one of the reasons why I'm homeschooling, is that I could go through the system and get what's called an IEP for my daughter and get all the accommodations and fight for it. Sometimes you have to fight for it. Um, and in the meantime, my 5-year-old is experiencing trauma because she's being forced to be in an environment that doesn't suit her energy. Or I work from home, I'm self-employed. She could stay at home, at least until we figure out what works best for her. And if she does do well in a group environment, maybe a year, 5 years from now, then we'll do that.
And Gail, again, just like when you brought up the whole point about whether ADHD or those kind of conditions would have been labeled as such and mentioned generations and generations ago, like you mentioned, or was it something new? I don't believe it's new. I believe that humans maybe are genetically evolving in different ways, but I feel like that core trait of human behavior on a spectrum my theory is it's been around. But the other point that you just made, again, that came to me as well because of Indian culture. If you looked at generations ago, the way people functioned in terms of their role in contributing to society was often um, done in a more, I felt like a more organic way. Like, given that the rights for women were very different. So, agnostic to that, but some people were like the ones that tended to the farms
Mm-hmm.
and the entire culture. And then my dad came from the sort of the subculture where they were the ones that were well read and they were the priests. I'm
Mm-hmm.
not saying this class based society is right now, but
Mm-hmm.
imagine if in that world you were given the opportunity to perform at your peak because of the fact that those operations or what do you call it roles are available to you as opposed to in our society these days like you're going to do something in front of the computer but what if that's clashing against your
Right.
cognitive abilities or
Right.
natural traits, right?
Yeah.
Maybe
Yeah.
I made this long-winded but I agree that wouldn't it be nice if we could place people based on what they shine at.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I remember, did you ever take a career aptitude assessment when you were a kid in school? And they would say, "Oh, you are meant to be, I don't know, a teacher, an astronaut, or something like that." I think I did something like that in fifth grade. I don't know if kids still do that, if they still do that in school. But
I'm
I also wonder if that was something that was on track for them or not, or if it was completely off base. Honestly, I don't remember what my
I don't
aptitude said. And there was that book, What Color is Your Parachute? I remember that as well. And there's so many assessments out there now too about, what are you meant to do or what's your calling in life. Um,
yeah,
but
and I have kind of mixed feelings about those because what you were describing, I feel like I was aware of it or exposed to it when I was younger,
mhm,
and then I remember in corporate world we'd have to take these different. There are different names for them.
right.
Myers Briggs.
Myers-Briggs, which is not scientific.
Yeah,
There's
I honestly,
DISC.
my gut always felt like this isn't right, and
Mhm,
thing I know about myself, and I remember being like all of 6 years old and figuring this one out for myself. I didn't. I just kind of knew, like, you know what? I think I really am innately very analytical, but I'm
mhm,
also very artistic.
mhm,
And I like saw my dad take his briefcase. He was an engineer working at like Rockwell or aerospace, and he'd leave. And my mom, while she was very educated, she didn't do any of those kind of higher end corporate jobs. and she could have, but we didn't have the means to do it. But she was very artistic.
Mm.
I thought to myself, well, one day, whatever I do, I'm going to combine the two. And I didn't know what it was until like I was doing it many years
Mm.
later. But there's something to be said about being able to trust your gut and intuition. What if we don't fit into that one box? Because
Right.
my biggest pet peeve is let me put you in a box and then
Hmm.
label you and not let you leave the box.
Yeah. Yeah, that's my issue with assessments as well. And my husband, he's a coach as well. He's certified to do DISC, and he also does something called Mind Sonar, which is based on NLP. And I see them as tools, but not a box, almost like a guideline, but it may be a shortcut. But I don't like it when it's used as like this is truth, 100% truth all the time, where I don't think that's necessarily true.
No,
Yeah.
I mean, I remember one, it was just a quick gig, not even on the professional level that I wanted to serve, but it was something just to make money. And I did it. And the woman who was running the program said, can you take this test? And I was like, oh, okay, fine, I'll be about it. And it was like, which word resonates with
Yeah.
you? How would you prioritize these words? And I'm like, I could manipulate this
To
if
what
I
you
wanted.
want or what I want, wish I was. Yeah.
Yeah, and so
Mm.
yeah, so I think we both agree that those labels and assessments may not work. And I also like the point you made earlier. Maybe these conditions have been around for a while, and humans had different ways to address it, like the Ayurveda had the doshas. Um, Now, coming back to like the more recent events in your life where you recognize that maybe I don't know if you feel like you might have been on the spectrum, but I feel like often I may be on the spectrum. Can you share a little bit about how um, you've managed that and what do you think AI can do to help?
Sure. I never knew that I had ADHD until just recently. It was 3 years ago where I was researching more about ADHD. I knew my husband has ADHD. He had never had it diagnosed. He was on no medication. And when the pandemic hit and we were around each other 24/7, it was driving me crazy. And I just had my daughter. I had enough. I basically gave him an ultimatum, like, you need to talk to your doctor now because I can't handle this. So he did. He got diagnosed, he got on medication, and just made a world of difference in both how he was managing his life as well as basically our relationship, because it improved our communication and how we managed our household. But as I was studying ADHD to provide this proof to him that you need to at least talk to your doctor, I came across videos about ADHD in women, because for many women, it shows up differently. For women, we tend to internalize it more. And then we're also very good at what's called masking. So, because generally speaking, we're more in tune to how we fit in a group, we can mask better and hide and figure out like how to get around it. So I think before I would just work all before I had my daughter, I would just work all day, like 12 hours a day or something. And I would get something done because I just didn't get off my chair, didn't move away from my desk until I got something done. And that's just not doable when you have people to take care of. And also I would burn out constantly because I was doing stuff like that. So as I started watching these videos, I thought, oh, maybe I have ADHD, because the symptoms for women were things like we internalize it more, we tend to daydream, we still do the things like procrastinate and things like that, but we're not necessarily hyperactive. It's more like we have a hyperactive mind than a hyperactive body. Um, but I did know that it was just so hard for me to focus sometimes and get something done. Like, why is it so hard for me to do something? And I, not to say that I recommend comparing yourself to other people, but when I do compare myself to people my age, thank you, Facebook, where I'm still Facebook friends with all my high school friends, that it's just like, why am I not doing why am I not at that same level as they are? We're the same age, we went to the same high school, and then they went off to other colleges. I didn't finish college. I had such a hard time again focusing and getting it done. So I never finished. I mean, I just kind of like made my way through life and made it work. I have a business. I've had several businesses. I make an income. I'm able to work just part-time, but it's like a struggle. And so I was kind of curious, and I got the diagnosis from through my insurance, and then I got on medication, and oh my gosh. And not to say again, this is for everybody, but for me, it felt like amazing. That is this what normal people feel like all the time? Just being able to focus, and it also helped me with my emotions too. Another symptom for ADHD is not being able to, or having a difficult time to regulate emotions. And yes, you can work on mindfulness and meditation and exercise, nutrition, that all helps. But for me, having medication is just this other boost that just works for me. And it was there was actually a bit of a grieving process too, of like, oh my gosh, if I knew about this when I was in high school, when I was struggling, in college when I was struggling, I'd be in a different place right now that I'm 48, almost 49. And so I did have to grieve my 20s and 30s, feeling so lost then. But it is what it is. I grieve it and then you let it go. Oh, you're on mute, Shilpa.
The more I work on myself, which is constant, I recognize or become aware of things that I'm like, whoa, I wish I had the ability to work through this, whatever that is. It's just usually deeper, more emotional stuff that affects everything.
Hmm.
Uh, that I wish I had the space, mentorship, and tools. And so the medication and the diagnosis are also probably tools for you. And the, the tools can vary. There should be no label or judgment on which tool is right necessarily.
Hmm.
Obviously, I think we both agree that maybe there's a possibility that the drugs we're aware of that help, maybe there's alternate drugs or medication that'll be available to us in the future. But regardless, at least it helps you function at your optimal as a human being.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I still feel a bit of internalized judgment regarding medication, because I value more of a natural wellness so much. Like, I believe in meditation and nutrition and spirituality. Those are important parts to who I am. And at the same time, you wouldn't tell someone who's diabetic to not take their insulin. Well, at least I wouldn't.
Yeah.
So
No,
I have to remind myself that it's a medical condition. It's not severe, but it's to the point where it it helps me in my day-to-day life.
yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
And I think that the the fact that you've approached this with so much wisdom, I know there's this grieving, where could you have been in life if you had those tools? But more spiritually speaking, I think everything happens for a reason. And you are evolving, you are growing, and you have this lovely daughter. and there are blessings here. And
Yeah.
in the grand scheme of things, what if it was really also about the fact that your daughter now has a mom who gets it, as opposed
Mm-hmm.
to another generation, the parenting would have been maybe a little bit different. Like I said, I knew of someone who was given drugs before the medical condition was even understood.
Right. Right. Yeah, I definitely believe this is part of my life lesson that I'm learning. There's a couple things I feel like I'm meant to learn are things like slowing down as well as completion. That's part of my cycle patterns that I have in my life is not completing a project and not seeing through. And there's all these different reasons why. But I believe that's definitely part of my life purpose in this life.
Yeah. And I mentioned to you that I've got those moments where I'm reflecting on what are my big lessons, and I'm aware that I've got things I need to work through.
Mhm,
Hopefully, I can continue making progress, but things like I tend to get on overdrive, and um, I've noticed my entire life, like it from the outside appears, oh, she doesn't have coping skills, but the irony is, I'm aware of what to do if it was a friend, but when I get to that overdrive mode,
mhm,
it's completely like analysis paralysis and um, stress mode.
mhm,
And which kind of coming back full circle, though, some of the technologies that we've been exploring together to help us not only as entrepreneurs but also as busy parents
mhm,
um, has been helping. But I'd love for you to go back to one funny thing that you mentioned in the very beginning, which is sometimes just going back to simple stuff, even old school, like you were mentioning just a spreadsheet and putting things like, what are my top three things I want to
mhm.
accomplish? That helps.
Yeah, it does. I mean, before having my daughter, I would just use a notebook. I like the bullet journal system where it's just notebook and you make a brain dump and then you prioritize. And I love the feeling of checking things off. It's such a dopamine hit. But paper doesn't work for my life anymore because I'm kind of running around with my daughter or I'm working at in the living room or in the kitchen or at my parents' house. I'm just kind of all over the place and sometimes I don't have the desk space for a notebook. So I found that putting it in the spreadsheet or I'm trying out this Reclaim calendar to see if okay, are you my thing where I turn on the browser and that's the first thing I see and I can focus on that, do my work and then, be done.
And I I wonder if reclaim, which the name itself kind of tells you, with the
Reclaim your time. Yeah.
reclaim your time, reclaim your
Energy.
right,
Mm-hmm.
reclaiming your energy through these tools, such as this particular one, is vital not only for the solopreneur, entrepreneur, but also it could be great for someone who's pivoting or in corporate or in
Yeah.
college or perhaps even retired but wants to optimize on their time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
Now, this particular tool, you said it's free currently?
There's a free trial for the pro version. I think there's a way to just have it completely free if you don't add on too many options. I added a lot of options. So I may end up paying for it because I really like how I set it up. So yeah, I think I'm gonna pay for it. It seems like it's worthwhile for me anyway to use.
Maybe we can do a video share of your screen
Sure.
in the near
Yeah.
future. We could show
Yeah.
that and put it on our YouTube.
Yeah. Because I put my business tasks, my marketing tasks, and then some personal habits in there as well. and it seems to be working for me so far.
You said it integrates with Google.
Yeah, it integrates with my Google Calendar.
That's wonderful. Yeah, I used to use Google Calendar, but for the reasons you described, I stopped doing it. And I go through every kind of phase, phase modality for managing tasks and time. Right now, I'm
Hmm.
back to what's called a full focus
Oh
plan.
yeah. Hmm.
I like it, but they're expensive, so I might have to find a new one.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, well, Gail, listen, I'm gonna have you back again. I want to go deeper on other AI tools and systems you use to streamline. But any parting words on reclaiming your energy?
I think the biggest thing is to remember that our time on earth is so short and precious, that we're not doing this to just so we could be productive. It's more of reclaiming our time and energy so that we can focus on what's most important in our lives, which is usually the people in our lives.
Yes, absolutely. I love the way you wrapped that up, and I agree with everything you said. Well, Gail, have a great end of the year, and I will talk to you soon.
Sounds good. Thank you, Shilpa.